Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor here, and really have a treat for us today. I have not only a New York Times best-selling author, but a New York Times best-selling author who's been on that list for 2 years, and for good reason, because our guest today, Gretchen Rubin, who is the author of The Happiness Project, the aforementioned New York Times raging bestseller, as well as Happier at Home, as well as the proprietor of happiness-project.com, is a fountain of happiness and joy and insight, and is here to share some of that with us today. Gretchen, welcome.
Well, hello, Jonathan. I'm very happy to be speaking to you.
Gretchen, the reason I wanted to bring you on the show, aside from your just excellent work in general, is here on Living the Smarter Science Slim, we focus on the science of optimal health, but so often, and as becoming more and more clear to me the longer I'm doing this, there is an equally important emotional side. And often things that we do for health and fitness are done as a means to an end, and that end is happiness. So I found that just exploring the topic of happiness in general can be very helpful. And you're an expert. So what can we learn about happiness based on you and your life?
That's a very big question. But just to pick up on something that you said that I think is absolutely true, and I also sort of feel like it's more and more true the more I think about these issues, is that when you're happier, you're more able to ask things of yourself, and you're more able to do things. You're more able to stick to your values. And so I think when people are unhappy, when they're stressed out, when they're not getting enough sleep, so they're just exhausted, when they're unhappy about, whether it's their work or their relationship or something, it's hard then to get yourself to go to the gym if you're not a person who necessarily always wants to exercise. It's hard to get yourself to eat healthfully if you have impulses that you're trying to resist. And so sometimes I think it's funny, sometimes people worry that it's selfish to want to be happier. But in fact, when we're happy, we're better able to ask a lot of ourselves. We're also more interested in the problems of other people and the problems of the world because we have the emotional wherewithal to deal with it, and when you're feeling unhappy, it's very hard to do anything except to sort of focus on your own problems. And that can make you isolated. It can make you defensive. And it can make it hard to stick to habits that might over the long term make you happier, but maybe in the short term mean denying yourself a little bit of instant gratification.
Well, Gretchen, I love what you said there in terms of sometimes the pursuit of quote unquote happiness can be perceived as this selfish effort. And I know you mentioned Aristotle in your work, and I love the Aristotelian concept of self-love as distinct from being selfish, where in fact an individual who loves themselves is doing so that they may be of service to others, and therefore is actually doing a selfless act rather than a selfish act. Have you found that to be true in your life?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's something that people get very sort of tangled up in. But I think one of the best articulations of it, as well as Aristotle, as you point out, is Robert Louis Stevenson, who said, "There is no duty we so much underrate as the duty of being happy." And this is so striking to me because you don't think of being happy as a duty. But I think for exactly the reasons that you say, you can characterize it as a duty because it's really, if it is selfish to want to be happy, we should be selfish, if only for selfless reasons, because it's really then that we're able to turn outward. Happier people they're more creative, they're more resilient, they give away more money, they volunteer more time, they're healthier and they have healthier habits, they make better team members and better leaders. There's all kinds of reasons why, even if you wanted to just completely focus on those things, it does make sense to think about your unhappiness. And also what I found, just from my own approach, is that a lot of people, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. It's not like you've got to change your life dramatically or do something huge. For most of us, there's a lot of stuff that without a lot of time, energy, or money, we could do that would actually significantly change the quality of our life. And it just seems to be a shame that you don't take the time to identify what those things are and act on them, because without much trouble, you could really, increase your enjoyment of your life.
Gretchen, I can't wait to dig into that low-hanging fruit, because I'd love to empower our listeners with that. And let's go there next. But one thing I want to...
We should have, there's the low-hanging fruit, right? Because that's what we all want.
Oh, absolutely. But before we go there, I want to dig for a second into this idea of you making yourself happier is one of the most important and in fact, selfless acts. And if your goal is to help others, potentially one of the most effective ways for you can do that, by way of an analogy, which I'm curious to get your thoughts of. And I hate to always use sports analogies, but I think it might fit here. So imagine, let's think of an individual's involvement in their family, a bit like an individual's involvement potentially in a sports team. And let's just use football as an example. And let's imagine that we have a quarterback of a football team. This is the person who gets the ball and throws the ball, for those people who are not super familiar with football.
Yeah, including me. Yeah.
And that person spends all of their time helping other members of the team get better at their skills, but never actually works on becoming a better quarterback. And then the game comes and they end up fumbling the ball, and they end up not knowing what's going on. And in fact, if their job is to be a quarterback, improving themselves and spending time becoming a better quarterback is probably the best way they can help the team, is it not?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and to use sort of another analogy, we all need to fill up our own gas tank. Because if you want to give everybody a ride for a football game, you've got to have gas in your own gas tank. And if you spend all your time filling up everybody else's tank, then you're not going to have what you need when you need to call on it. So absolutely. And for that quarterback, they might pat themselves on the back and think, oh, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do. Look at me. But they're really not serving their team as in the best way they can, because again, it's that duty, to think about yourself as well. I mean, one of the things that I did was to identify these 8 splendid truths. I was very inspired by all the numbered lists of Buddhism, which I get a big kick out of. So I have 8 splendid truths, and the second one has 2 parts, and I think everybody recognizes the first part, but a lot of people don't think about the second part, which is just as important. So the first part is that one of the best ways to make yourself happy is to make other people happy. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely true. It's one of the very nicest things about human nature, and I don't think anybody would dispute that. But what's also true is that while one of the best ways to make yourself happy is to make other people happy, it's also true that one of the best ways to make other people happy is to be happy yourself. Mm-hmm. And happy people make people happy. And so again, it's back to this idea that it isn't selfish. It isn't a waste of time. It isn't inappropriate. A lot of people worry that in a world so full of suffering, it's not morally appropriate to want to be happy. They feel like, how can I work on my own happiness when I see all this, all these people suffering? But actually, by working on your own happiness, you really give yourself the wherewithal to try to intervene and to try to take action and try to do things about it. People who are less happy tend not to be as focused on making changes or thinking about how they could make a difference.
I love it. Well, speaking of the 8 truths and low-hanging fruit and things we can start doing today, certainly we don't want to give away the farm. Individuals should definitely join the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have already enjoyed your work in the Happiness Project, as well as Happier at Home. But what are can you scratch the surface? Can you give us just a little hint of some of these low-hanging fruit things we can start doing today to be happier?
Okay, well, the first one I'm going to say, I know you're gonna agree with, which is to get enough sleep. I think so many people are just exhausted, and they pretend like they only need 5 hours of sleep a night, and but they sleep binge on the weekends. They use their snooze alarm, that instrument of torture, over and over again. I mean, if you want to be happy, I think you really need to get enough sleep. And it's so basic, it seems silly, but I think it's very hard just to have the basic amount of energy that you need for your life if you're constantly sleep deprived. So that's the first thing I say to everyone.
I definitely agree with you from a biological perspective as well, Gretchen, because in some ways being sleep deprived is just like being food deprived. Like your body is starved. And again, back to the car and the gas, like if you don't have gas in your tank, you can do whatever the hell you else want to the car. It ain't going to run as well as it should be running. So one of the things that potentially I see and I shake my head at because it's so unfortunate. And this is pretty common, Gretchen. I imagine you may even have friends or know people who do this. And that is not only not getting enough sleep, but trading sleep for things that will further deplete your gas tank in a destructive fashion. Let me give you an example. Waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning so that you can go jog outside in the cold on the road with cars shooting exhaust at you for an hour. Like that seems to be the double whammy there, where you're depriving your body of something it must have and then pounding the pavement and doing something which further increases stress hormone levels. It's a 1-2 punch, is it not?
Yeah, and my next book is going to be about habits. So I've been thinking a lot about habits and how you can construct your life to make it easier to have good habits and harder to have bad habits. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is this idea of foundation. And that if you want to have good habits, you really need to think about your foundation. And these are often habits that you want to get yourself. So you sort of have to change your habits in order to change your habits, which is a little perplexing. But these are sort of habits that really should come first because they will make it easier to do everything else. And that is sleep. And you said that you made the analogy of sleep to food. I completely agree. I think a lot of people have weird eating habits or have trouble with their eating because they're hungry. They let themselves get hungry. They're constantly being whiplashed, and they're exhausted. They're depleted for whatever reason. And when you're walking through the day and you're depleted, whether because you haven't had enough sleep or you haven't had enough to eat or you have a headache and you haven't taken pain reliever or you've let yourself get too hot or too cold or whatever it is, you're just not going to make good choices. And you're always going to feel like you need to fill up that gas tank and you need to give yourself that shot of energy. And usually when people are desperate for a shot of energy, they reach for something that is not good for them. And so by working on your foundation, then you can make good choices. And those good choices are the kind of thing that over the long term are going to make you happier. But you got to set yourself up so that it's easy to make good choices. Because you're right. It's a biological need and your body is just going to be doing everything that it can to direct you to get that gas tank full again.
Well, Gretchen, and what are some other foundational elements that you would say we need to take care of before we take care of maybe some higher order bits? Because I often find, too, that in our culture, we tend to oftentimes we may lose sight of these basic things. For example, if an individual would just get 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night, drink sufficient clean water, and ensure that they're eating nutrient-dense foods, I would argue that they would achieve better benefit than any of these top 100 tips and supplements and all these kind of like refinements, which seem to only matter once that base is established. But it's a bit like we don't ever establish the base and then try to do these quick fix approaches on top of it. What do you think?
I think you're exactly right. The people can get they forget to do first things first. And so do the first thing first. So here's the thing that's, I'm not sure if it's low-hanging fruit. Aspects of it are low-hanging fruit. And it's been a surprise to me. And it's surprising to me that I feel like it's part of the foundation for most people. It's not part of the foundation for everyone, but I think for most people it is. And that has to do with the weird connection for most people between outer order and inner calm. Not for everyone, but for most people, there's something about being in a chaotic, messy, cluttered environment that makes them feel weighed down, makes them feel more tired, more overwhelmed. It makes it harder to make decisions. You're not even aware of it. But then over and over, people tell me that when they cleaned out a room or they cleaned out a closet or they cleaned, a friend of mine said, I cleaned out my fridge and I felt like I could switch careers. The number one resolution people specifically mentioned to me, as trivial as it sounds, is the resolution to make your bed. There's something about just getting order over the stuff of life that makes you feel more in control of your life generally. And that might be an illusion, but it's a helpful illusion. And so for most people, taking the time to clean out your office, every Friday afternoon, or to take an hour on a Saturday and go through your closet and get rid of the coats that nobody wears so you can actually hang something up in there, without jamming it in with all your strength. It's hard because clutter is constantly sweeping through, and everything, you get things organized and then they kind of fall into chaos again. So it takes constant vigilance. But I used to think this was a trivial thing. It just doesn't matter that much. But it does seem that it matters more than you might think. And it seems that for many people, it's an important aspect of foundation. When they feel like there's not a lot of stuff in their house that they don't actually want or use or love, when they feel like they have clear surfaces, when they feel like they can easily put things away and easily find things, then it's easier even to eat right, or to get exercise, or to hold your temper, or to get yourself to do something that you don't want to do. That outer order makes you feel calmer and more orderly inside. And again, it's easier to ask more of yourself because your environment is helping provide you with that foundation to ask more of yourself.
Gretchen, I think that's so spot on, and I think it's a good example of one of the things we talk about this show with regards to exercise and even eating, and that's controlling what you can. And so much of our life is completely out of our control. So if we can really take control of these things which are under our control, for example, what we eat is under our control. There's no politics involved. It's just what we choose to eat is under our control. When we choose to exercise, whether or not we do that in a smart, safe way and we really go at it, or we just go through the motions, that's up to our control. Whether or not we live in a cluttered space or not, that's up to us. And as we start making these private victories, as Stephen Covey would say, these small private victories can help it be easier to make larger public victories. Because it's a bit like we start saying yes to ourselves and then saying yes to the world becomes easier, is it not?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things is that, like you say, it's like control what you can. I think sometimes people focus on what they can't control and don't then take the time to control what they easily could control. Or even, somebody saying, well, when I go out to dinner with a bunch of people, it's a business dinner, I feel uncomfortable if I don't have a drink and, everything like that. Well, you could say, well, okay, that's that situation. And maybe you feel like you're under a certain kind of social pressure there. But how many meals is that out of meals in a month? Like, think about every day you're, eating at home, or every situation where you don't feel that. So you can focus on what is within your control. And exactly as you say, when you feel like you're in control of what you can control, it also gives you a greater feeling of efficacy as you think about the things that are less within your control. But a lot of times you're more in control than you want to say. I mean, I had a friend who said to me, well, I've been seeing so many patients this month, I haven't been able to do any writing. And I was like, you pose that as those are the two alternatives, but you've got a million things going on in your life. It's not like there's a one-to-one correlation, but he was acting like it's totally out of my control because this other thing is happening. I'm seeing more patients. Instead of sort of saying, like, when I see more patients, I feel like I don't want to spend my free time writing because I feel, he could have explained it in a way so that it was clear to him the choices that he was making and the control that he was exerting. But instead he was describing it for himself in a very passive way. And I think that made him feel like he was not in control and not recognize the degree to which he was in control. Because sometimes knowing that you're in control is reassuring. And sometimes you're just like, well, this is the consequence of my choices. So that's what I want. Okay, fine, I'll accept it. But when you pretend like it's not within your control when it is, then you're giving up something. You're giving up that feeling of power.
Absolutely, Gretchen. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that is somewhat a travesty is when it comes to health and fitness, technically we are almost completely in control. Certainly there are external factors that influence us, but at the end of the day, what we're putting in our mouth and whether or not we are physically active and how we're physically active is up to us. However, it is now becoming indisputably clear that the traditional path to healthy is in fact not at all healthy. In fact, doing chronic amounts of high impact cardiovascular exercise, eating an extremely high starch and sugar based diet simply because those are low in fat, and avoiding natural foods which may contain some fat in favor of these low fat food like products is not healthy. And what worries me about this, Gretchen, is we have individuals now who do take control, but the instruction they've been given as to what to do once you have taken control is incorrect. Therefore, they do it and they try hard and they get worse. And then they think that they don't have control when in fact they do, but they've just been given incorrect instructions.
Yeah, no, that's a very painful thing to see, because it's one thing to just, not try to not even worry about it. But then it's even worse to be conscientious and to be trying and have it not work because you're following a path that is just not one that's going to lead you to success. And so you're trying just as hard as a person who's succeeding, but because you're pointed in the wrong direction, you're not getting to where you want to be.
Well, and Gretchen, I would imagine that you've actually seen something like this in the happiness arena, because I love, positive psychology, and it's another one of my passions that I pursue in my copious free time. But the fact that we have individuals who acquire more and more material wealth, more and more status, more and more fame, and yet continue to get more and more depressed seems to show that, again, there is this path we've been prescribed, like get money, become famous, and that will make you happy, whereas we actually don't see that bearing out in real life.
Well, I think that it's clear to me that the way that we can only have a happy life on the foundation of our own nature, our own interests, and our own values. And so the more closely your life reflects your interests, your nature, and your values, then the happier you're going to be. And when you pursue things because you think that that's what everybody wants, or that's what my parents think would make me happy, or that's what other people expect, or that's what other people want. I can get it. Other people want it. Therefore, I must want it too. That's not going to make you happy, because just because 99 out of 100 people would be happy with some opportunity, say, it doesn't mean that it's going to make you happy. And this can be very painful, because sometimes we have an idea of the way that we wish we were, the way we think we ought to be. And so it can be painful to acknowledge what really makes you happy. I mean, it was very hard for me to just admit to myself, I just don't like music very much. I mean, I get why people like it. I know tons of people who love music. I wish that I liked it better, because I see all this enjoyment that people get from it. You know what? I like a song here and there, whatever, but I'm just not that into music. Or travel. Some people, they love to travel. They look forward to, they plan it. They love the adventure. I'm a real homebody.
Yep.
I'm happy with a staycation. I travel from time to time, and that's good, but I'm not a big adventure travel person, and that's painful, because I wish I were. I think it's cool, but that's just not who I am. And so I think you have to be very honest with yourself about what you like and what's true about you, because that's the only thing that's going to make you happy.
Gretchen, this seems to get back to a core truth that we often talk about here on the show, and also gets back to our earlier author of Aristotle, and that is the subject of the unexamined life not being worth living. And I see, like, what you just described there was, we have to look inward and say, like, when it comes to happiness, is this action actually making me happier? Or oftentimes, is it actually making me sadder? I notice, even I've had this experience, a lot of things I do with the belief that it will make me happier actually makes me less happy. And the reason I bring this up with reference to on a podcast that pertains to health and fitness is, oftentimes we will do things to help make ourselves what we perceive to be healthier or fitter, and in reality we feel terrible. But we keep doing it because we believe externally that's what we should be doing. But internally, we're getting a very clear message that it's not. And what I hear you saying is that we have to let that internal locus of control really be the center, not the external.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because I think one of the fundamental tensions within happiness is, on the one hand, you want to accept yourself, And on the other hand, you want to expect more from yourself. And so sometimes I'm sure we've all had experiences like this. Sometimes there's a goal or there's a skill or there's something that feels uncomfortable. And for me, the question is, okay, is this something that is properly within my reach and I should expect more for myself and reach toward it and challenge myself and maybe go out of my comfort zone and deal with this? Or really, is this something that is just not true to my own nature and it feels uncomfortable to me because it's not something that has anything to do with me. It's somebody else's goal. It's what somebody else wants. And so I should just leave it alone and not do it. And I think that's something that can sometimes be very hard for people to distinguish. Are they accepting themselves and are they expecting more from themselves? Because both things need to be true in a happy life. But you shouldn't kid yourself about whether something is working for you or not. But it can be hard to tell sometimes.
It absolutely can. And that reminds me, Gretchen, of the concept of flow, or Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi over at University of Chicago, who I'm sure you're familiar with, certainly a major player in the happiness arena, where he talks about the critical and very positive tension between skill and challenge, where certainly a happy life is not one that is devoid of challenge. Yeah. It's simply one where the challenges match our skill level.
Exactly. I mean, and that's one of the I think one of the key things about happiness is that one of the things that is most important to happiness is a sense of growth. We're happier when we feel like we're growing, when we're learning, when we're helping, when we're fixing something, when we're making something better. And so a sense of growth is a key engine of happiness. On the other hand, growth often comes with a lot of pain. Like, when you're growing, it can be inconvenient. It can be frustrating. You can feel stupid. And a lot of times you've got to put up with that, in order to do something that over the long term is going to make you happier. So, learning I just taught myself how to use a new software program, and I was dreading it because, it's always like, oh, it doesn't install properly the first time. And then you've got to go through the manual and then click. And it feels like, oh, I'm spending all this time just learning how to use the software. I'm not even doing any work yet. But I was like, you know what? Do it, read the manual, go through it, and then you'll feel great when you know how to use this new software program. And then it's going to make everything easier for you in the long run. So you just have to put up with that in order to get this growth that is really going to be something that's going to work in the long term. And so, but if I've been trying to do something that I had no fundamental actual interest in doing, like learning Italian, which I don't particularly want to learn how to use Italian, it would have felt very sterile and futile. Because it would have been all this work and I wouldn't have even have cared. Mm-hmm. So it is back to what you were saying about the match between what is the goal, what's the undertaking, and what's the person who's doing the undertaking, and is that a good fit?
And bringing that back, Gretchen, because that is so spot on in terms of focusing on things not only that bring us joy, but that we have control over. When we think about that from a health and fitness perspective, this is why I get so encouraged by pursuing health rather than pursuing weight loss, because objectively, like, we can take steps and they will make us healthier. Now, we may be in a metabolic state where that may or may not result in weight loss, but I can promise you that a healthy body will naturally pursue a healthy weight, whereas an unhealthy body will naturally pursue an unhealthy weight. But when we focus on health, that is something like we can control and is of universal interest and won't disappoint us, rather than focusing on the number on the scale.
But I couldn't agree more. And I think exactly about this idea of control. It pains me when I see people setting goals for themselves which they can't achieve. So if you say, I'm going to lose, my New Year's resolution is to lose 20 pounds by July 1st. You cannot control that. You can control how you eat. You can control how much you move around. You can control how you behave, but you cannot control the outcome.
Yes.
Same thing, like a friend of mine was like, my goal is to have a bestseller. And I was like, you can't control that. You can say, my goal is to write the best book that I possibly can. My goal is to be finished with my novel by the end of the year. My novel is, my goal is to write 15 query letters. Like, make it about the thing that you can actually make happen, because you can't control the outcomes. And then you feel frustrated because you didn't, and it also, I think, moves your eye away from the thing that's important to focus on. Because if you're focused on the weight, you may not pay as much attention to your behavior. If you're focused on the best-selling novel, you might not be spending as much time thinking about, okay, well, what are all the steps that I need to go through that I can control? Because you just like sit there fantasizing about how great it's going to be when you hit this goal, which you may or may not achieve. And in life, so often, for one reason or another, we don't actually reach our goals. And that's another reason why really doing what you want is important. Because if you're doing what you want, even if in the end you don't actually succeed, you feel good about it because you've been doing, even if you don't lose the 20 pounds, if you feel healthier, if you feel better in your body, if you feel stronger, that's going to feel good. I wrote a book that did not, I will say, did not succeed in finding its audience, but I loved writing that book. So do I regret it? No, because I had a great time, even though it didn't result in the sales that I would have wanted. If I'd written a book because somebody said, write this book, it'll be a bestseller, and then it didn't, I would have felt crushed because I'm like, oh my gosh, I spent all this time and energy doing something that I didn't want to do. And then, look at this. I would be so upsetting and frustrating. But if you do the things that you love to do, if you do the things that fit with your own nature and temperament, then although reaching a goal and outcomes are obviously important and add a lot to a happy life, they're not as crucial. And it's not as crushing if things don't work out exactly the way you planned.
Well, and certainly, Gretchen, I would imagine that the fact that book was on a subject that you loved and that you enjoyed, that helped you to be a happier, stronger person. And in fact, in the long run, it enabled you to write books that were phenomenally successful because you didn't get burnt out and didn't have to then move to an island and resign yourself to life completely because you're like, well, life is just unfair and I give up, because you were focused on doing things that you love.
Well, and I think that's a very good point, coming back to that idea of foundation, is the more that you're doing things that you enjoy, that itself is energizing, and having to do a lot of things that you don't like to do is depleting. And so the more you can shape your life around the kinds of things that you actually enjoy and either delegate or ignore or, throw money at things that you don't like to do, that's going to also build your foundation, because you're just going to have more energy as you go through your day because you're enjoying yourself. And I'm also a big fan of treats, like picking good treats, healthy treats, so that you do give yourself those spikes of energy. Now, for me, writing a book about John F. Kennedy, that was a treat. Like I love doing that. So for me, that was very energizing. And then there's little treats, like I'm really into smells. So if I need a little bit of a lift, I go to my shrine to smell and smell one of my crazy smells that I love. And that's, clearly writing a book about JFK is one kind of treat, and sniffing a bottle of vanilla is another kind of treat. But there's room for both of them because they help you stay energized and stay feeling like you can face your day. And then that's when you can make those decisions that build long-term happiness.
Well, I think you touched on such a profound truth there, Gretchen, whereas that those treats that you identified are treats that empower you to be happier and better in the rest of your life, rather than treats, which here's a morbid example, but like taking crack can make you feel good in the short term, but it certainly doesn't empower us to then do better in the other areas of our life. And what you mentioned, smart treats are those that give us that boost right now and enable us to continue. No?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think something that everyone should spend time thinking about is, what is my very long list of treats? Like because I'm sure you hear this a lot. People are like, I deserve it. I need it. They feel like they need a treat. They deserve a treat. Like they're going to get their treat. So great. You should have your treats, but have a long list of things that you can have, that like you say, aren't going to be things that over the long term are going to be like the crack that's really going to bring you down, or fill you with remorse or regret. I mean, somebody, I suggested this. I thought this was like a great treat. She said, I indulge in fur therapy. I was like, what's for a therapy? And she's like, I just like sit down and pet my dog for 10 minutes. I was like, that is a great treat, because it does. There's nothing that will cheer you up more than just like spending some time with your dog. And it's right, and it's nice for your dog too. And, but maybe you need to really make a thing out of it and say, I'm really going to sit down and do this. And make it into a real treat, and like looking for those opportunities to identify treats. Because the more that you have at your disposal, then the less likely you are to do things that are going to be harmful in the long run. Because we all know the difference between the thing that, we do it knowing that we're going to be sorry we did it. That's probably the reason they're treats. They're treats because we usually try not to have them because we know they're not good for us. So you're like, oh, wow, this, buying this extra pair of jeans is a real treat because you know that you don't need another pair of jeans and you know that you shouldn't be spending the money that way. That's why it feels like a treat. If you need a pair of jeans, you're like, oh, I need a pair of jeans. You go out and you buy a pair of jeans. It's like, it might be fun, but it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I deserve this. Same way.
Oh, I love it, Gretchen. Well, I mean, this time has just flown by, and we're going to have you back on the show because I feel like we are just getting started here. And
Hey.
Folks, in the meantime, if you can't wait, which I personally can't, please do what I'm about to do and go online or go to your local bookstore and pick up a copy of Gretchen's more than 2-year New York Times best-selling book, The Happiness Project, as well as her work, Happier at Home. And you can even check her out at happiness-project.com, where you can get free daily happiness quotes as well as a newsletter so you can get your daily Gretchen fix, which, frankly, I think is a treat we would all enjoy, Gretchen.
Oh, there you go. That's a good treat.
Well, Gretchen, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
That was great to talk to you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. And listeners, this week and every week moving forward, remember that a great way to ensure happiness is to eat more and exercise less, but to do that smarter. Talk to you soon.